The gravel was cutting into my knees before I understood I'd gone down. That's the first thing I remember clean, not the pain in my gut, which came a half-second later like a delayed thunderclap, but the gravel, sharp little points of it through my work pants, and the phone still pressed to my ear because some part of me hadn't given up on the call yet. "Dad, I hear you," Curtis said, and I could hear a television behind him, some football game, somebody's kid laughing. "I hear you, but it's just not something I can do right now." I was holding my left side. There was a mass in there the doctor in Statesboro had drawn a picture of on a paper towel. A little cartoon lump he circled twice, like circling it twice made it more true. $500 for the surgery deposit. Insurance would eat the rest, they said, but they wouldn't touch a scalpel without the $500 up front, and I did not have $500. I had $1,100 total to my name at 51 years old, and $800 of that was already promised to the light bill and the note on the truck. "It's $500, Curtis. I know what it is, Dad. You know what it is." I said it back to him flat, not a question, just repeating it so he'd hear how it sounded coming out of somebody else's mouth. Behind him, the television crowd roared at something. A touchdown, maybe. Somebody's whole Sunday going fine. He didn't say anything else useful. He said, "Things are tight," and he said, "You know how it is," and he said, "Let me see what I can do," which is a sentence men say when they have already decided not to do anything and both of us knew it, and neither of us said so. I hung up sitting in my own driveway with gravel in my knees, and I want to tell you I cried, because that would make a better story, but I didn't. I just sat there a while looking at the dent in the mailbox post where Curtis had backed his mother's old Buick into it 15 years before, and I thought, not for the first time and not for the last, that I had raised a boy I did not entirely know. My name is Walter Eugene Combs. Everybody who's known me more than 5 minutes calls me Walt. I was 51 years old the year this happened, and I am 57 now, which means I have had 6 years to turn it over, and turning a thing over that many times does not wear it smooth. It just wears you. I grew up in Ashby, Georgia, a town so small it doesn't get its own exit off the highway, just a sign that says next right and trusts you to find it. My daddy ran a feed store there for 31 years, and I ran it after him for 26 more. Combs Farm and Feed, cinder block building with a tin roof that sounded like God's own drumline every time it rained. I knew every farmer within 30 miles by name and by what they owed me, which in a small place is close to the same thing as knowing a man's soul. Curtis is my only child. His mother, Renata, left when he was 9, and I raised him alone after that, which people in Ashby like to remind me was a hard thing to do, as if I needed reminding. I taught him to work. I had him sweeping the store floor at 6 years old and running the register by 12 and doing the books by 16, because I believed and I still believe this, even now, even knowing what I know that a boy who understands where money comes from grows into a man who respects it. I thought I was giving him something. I thought I was giving him everything. What I didn't teach him, apparently, was where money goes once it leaves your hand and lands in somebody else's. Here is the part town still talks about, or did for a couple years, before some other family's mess came along to replace mine as the thing people chewed over at the pig. 2 years before that phone call in the driveway, Curtis had come to me with a plan. He was 30 then, married to a girl named Deanna from over in Metter, and he'd been working at the store part-time between other jobs that never stuck. He sat me down at my own kitchen table with a legal pad and told me the store's bookkeeping was a mess, that I was leaving money on the table with vendors, that I needed somebody who understood the modern side of things, his words handling the finances while I focused on what I was good at. I was good at feed. I was not, he was right, good at spreadsheets, so I gave him power of attorney. I gave him signing authority on the business accounts. And then, because he asked so reasonably, and I trusted him so completely, on my personal savings too, the account I'd built dollar by dollar since I was 19 years old, the one with just over $211,000 in it. Money I never touched, money that was supposed to be what let me stop working someday without being afraid. It took him 14 months to move all of it. I didn't see it happening because I didn't look. That's the part I have to own, and I do own it. I didn't look, because looking would have meant not trusting my own son, and I had built my whole idea of myself as a father around the belief that I'd raised somebody worth trusting. By the time I understood what had happened, the business accounts were drained to cover restructuring. The store itself was mortgaged against a loan I never signed for but had, technically, authorized him to sign for me. And my personal savings, the $211,000, had been wired in 4 transfers to an account in Curtis's name alone. He and Deanna moved to Charlotte 4 months after the last transfer. He told people it was for a job opportunity. He left me $300 in an envelope, cash, no note, tucked into the mailbox with the dent in the post. $300. I have thought about that number more than I have thought about the 211,000, honestly. The number that big just becomes an idea, an abstraction, something you can't hold in your hand. $300 I could hold. I counted it twice standing at the mailbox, like counting it again might make it different the second time. He didn't leave conditions the way you'd leave a note. He laid them out over a phone call about a week before the move, calm as anything, like he was reading me the terms of a lease. I wrote them down after, on the back of a feed invoice, because some instinct in me knew I would need to remember them exactly, word for word, and not let memory soften them into something more forgivable. He said, "You don't call Deanna's family, ever, for any reason. You don't tell people in Ashby the real numbers, what the business owed, what got transferred. If people ask, you tell them it was financial trouble, nothing specific. You don't contact me more than once a month. If it's more than that, I stop answering for a while to reset the boundary. If you need money, you ask once clearly, and you accept whatever answer you get without asking again. You don't involve a lawyer." He said this one twice. "When my son is old enough to ask about you, I'll decide what he's told and when." That last one is the one that still catches somewhere under my ribs when I read it back, all these years later, off that yellowed invoice I still have folded in my dresser drawer. My grandson didn't even have a name yet when Curtis said it. Deanna was 5 months along. Curtis stood in my kitchen, in the house he grew up in, and told me he would decide when and how his own son learned that his grandfather existed, as a condition of leaving me $300 and a mortgaged building. I said okay. God help me, I said okay, because saying anything else felt like losing the only thread I had left to him. Ashby is small enough that a thing like this doesn't stay private. Within a month, everybody at the Piggly Wiggly and the Baptist Church and the Farm Bureau meeting knew some version of it. And versions is the operative word, because the story changed shape depending on who was carrying it. Some people said I'd mismanaged the store myself and Curtis had tried to save it and failed. Some people said I'd driven him off, been hard on him growing up, that a boy raised by a bitter man does bitter things. Deanna's mother, Pauline, told anybody who'd listen that I was difficult and that Curtis had done everything he could. I stopped going to the Farm Bureau meetings. I stopped going to the Baptist Church. Not because I lost my faith exactly, but because I couldn't sit in a pew with people who thought they knew my son better than I did. People repeating a story that made me the villain in the one relationship I'd tried hardest not to fail at. My sister Carol didn't call for the better part of a year. She sided with Curtis, more or less, said family shouldn't air things this way, meaning I shouldn't have told even the little I told. There was a Sunday, maybe 5 months into it, when I ran into Pauline at the gas station on 301, both of us pumping gas 10 feet apart, and she looked at me over the roof of her Corolla and said, loud enough for the man at the next pump to hear, "I hope you're proud of yourself, running that boy off the way you did." I didn't say anything back. I just stood there holding the pump handle until it clicked off, and I got in my truck and drove around the county for 2 hours before I went home, because I didn't trust what my face was doing, and I didn't want Loretta. I hadn't met Loretta yet. This was before her. I mean, I didn't want anybody to see it. Men I'd sold feed to for 20 years started being short with me at the hardware counter. Polite in that particular Southern way, that's really just a longer, more elaborate form of contempt. Somebody left a casserole dish on my porch with a note that said, "Praying for your family," in handwriting I didn't recognize. And I never did figure out who sent it or what exactly they thought they were praying for. whether it was for me or at me. I stopped correcting people when they got the story wrong. There didn't seem to be a version of the truth that made me look like anything other than either a fool who got robbed by his own boy or a hard old man who drove him to it. And after a while, both of those felt too heavy to keep arguing against in a gas station parking lot. I closed what was left of the store. I sold the building for less than the mortgage owed and cleared the difference out of what remained of my dignity. Working a stretch of jobs I'm not going to dress up. Stocking shelves at 52 years old at a Tractor Supply 40 minutes from the town I used to be somebody in. I lived in a rented house on Delway Road with a leak in the bathroom ceiling. I patched myself 3 separate times. People assumed I was broke. I let them assume it. Some part of that assumption was even useful to me, though it would be years before I understood why. I need to go back further than the phone call, further than Curtis, to explain the part nobody in Ashby ever knew. Not Curtis, not Deanna, not Carol, not even my late wife when she was alive. When I was 22, my daddy's cousin Earl Whitfield owned close to 1,100 acres out past the Ogeechee, timber and scrubland mostly. Useless-looking dirt that Earl had held onto out of stubbornness more than sense. Earl never married, never had kids of his own, and toward the end of his life his own brothers and nephews circled him like the whole family had turned into buzzards, showed up with casseroles and church visits and sudden tender, concerned the very year Earl got sick. All of them angling for a piece of that land, all of them pretending it was about love. I watched that happen from the outside, 22 years old, disgusted by it in a way that planted something in me permanent. Earl saw it too, saw exactly what his family had turned into, and out of some contrariness or clear-sightedness I never fully understood, he left 40 acres of it, just 40. A corner of the whole spread nobody else wanted because it was mostly swamp to me. Not to his brothers, not to his nephews who'd been so devoted those last 2 years. To me, a young man who used to help him mend fence and never once asked him for a thing. I never told anybody. Not my first wife, not Curtis, not a soul in Ashby. I paid the taxes on it quietly every year out of the store's petty cash, filed under a vendor name so it wouldn't show up as mine on anything Curtis later would ever have reason to look at. I told myself I was keeping it as a rainy day thing, and I suppose that's true. But underneath that I think I was keeping it because I'd watched what family does to people once they know there's something to inherit. And some frightened part of me decided the only way to keep something safe was to make sure nobody I loved knew it existed. I did not consider, at 22 or at 51, that this meant my own son would one day treat me exactly the way Earl's family treated him, except he didn't even know there was anything to circle. He thought there was nothing left. He took what he thought was everything and never once suspected there was a piece of ground out past the Ogeechee he didn't know to ask about. I want to say I felt vindicated by that. Mostly what I felt was sick. 3 years after the phone call in the driveway, I met Loretta and Prout at a feed and seed supply auction outside Statesboro. Of all places, both of us bidding against each other for a used grain drill neither of us needed all that badly. She was 44, divorced a long time, ran a small orchard operation with her brother. She didn't know anything about the store or Curtis or $211,000, and for the first several months I didn't tell her, not out of secrecy exactly, but because I had gotten so used to being a man with no story worth telling that I forgot how to offer one. We married the following spring. Our daughter, Junie June Louise Combs, was born the year after that, when I was 55 years old, an age I never once imagined starting over at. I am raising Junie different than I raised Curtis, and I don't say that with pride, I say it the way you'd confess something. I don't have her doing the books at 12. I don't measure her worth to me, or teach her to measure her worth to herself by how useful she can be. When she cries, I don't tell her to toughen up the way my own daddy told me, and I told Curtis. I sit on the floor of her room some nights just to be near her breathing, and I think about how I never once did that for Curtis. Not because I didn't love him, but because nobody had ever shown me that love could look like sitting on a floor doing nothing. Loretta asked me once, gently, lying in the dark, Whether I was raising Junie so carefully because of Curtis, whether this whole second life was an apology I was making to a daughter for a son's sake. I told her I didn't know. That's still true. I don't know. I did eventually tell Loretta about the land, about Earl, about the 40 acres, about why I'd kept it hidden even from my own blood for 30 years. She didn't ask me to change anything. She just asked, does Curtis know? And I said no, and she said, do you want him to? And I didn't have an answer for that one either. The land sat quiet for 35 years, worth almost nothing anybody could point to, until a company out of Atlanta started buying up right-of-way along the Ogeechee corridor for a solar array. 40-some parcels stitched together, mine included, and the offer that came in the mail 18 months ago had 4 commas worth of zeros behind it that I had to read 3 separate times sitting at Loretta's kitchen table before the number stopped looking like a typo. I didn't tell anybody in Ashby, old habits, but land records are public, and landmen out of Atlanta go door to door and courthouse to courthouse. And somewhere in that process my grandson Curtis and Deanna's boy, Tyler, 17 now, a junior at whatever high school they've got him in up in Charlotte, got curious enough, or bored enough, or maybe just decent enough, to look up his own last name on the Bullock County property site one evening, the way kids do things now, without thinking much about what they'll find. And he found me. Found 40 acres assessed for more money than his own father had stolen from me, sitting under my full name, Walter Eugene Combs, a grandfather he had been told almost nothing true about his whole life. I know all this because Tyler called me himself first, not Curtis. Tyler, a voice I'd never heard as an adult voice, cracking a little with nerves, saying, "Is this Walter Combs? I think you're my grandfather." And I sat down hard on Loretta's porch steps and didn't say anything for what felt like a full minute. We talked for 40 minutes that night. He didn't ask me for anything. He asked what I was like, whether I still had a dog, whether it was true I used to run a feed store, small true things a boy asks when he's trying to build a person out of rumors. He told me he'd found my name on some property website, said it careful, like he wasn't sure how much of that he was supposed to say out loud. And I understood right then that he'd seen the acreage and the number both, and that he was 17 years old and decent enough to lead with the dog question instead. At one point he asked, quiet, almost like he didn't want the answer, "Did my dad really take your money?" And I didn't know how to hand a boy that particular truth without also handing him something he'd have to carry the rest of his life about his own father. So I said, "That's a conversation you ought to have with him," which felt like a coward's answer even as I said it and still does. He told me his mama didn't know he'd called. He asked if that was okay. I told him it was okay, though I lay awake a long while after we hung up wondering what it meant that the boy already understood, at 17, that some things in this family have to happen in secret to happen at all, understood it the same instinctive way I had, 35 years before him, standing at Earl Whitfield's bedside, watching people love a dying man loudest right when there was something in it for them. I liked him instantly and completely, in a way that scared me a little, because liking him meant there was now a door standing open that I could not fully control anymore. 4 days later, Curtis called for the first time in 6 years. I didn't answer. I saw the name still saved in my phone the same as it was 6 years ago. I never changed it, never could make myself change it, and I let it ring itself out on the kitchen counter while Loretta stood at the stove not turning around, giving me the privacy of pretending she wasn't listening to my breathing change. He called again 2 days after that, and again the following week. He left one voicemail, 31 seconds long, that I have listened to more times than I'd admit to anybody but you. He didn't mention the land. He didn't have to. He said, "Hey Dad, it's me. I know it's been a while. I've just been thinking about you a lot lately, wanted to check in, see how you're doing. Call me back when you get a chance. Love you." 6 years of silence, and the checking in arrives 4 days after his son finds 40 acres worth more money than the man ever took from me the first time. I want to tell you I know exactly what I feel listening to that voicemail, but that would be a lie dressed up as clarity, and I promised myself a long time ago I wouldn't do that anymore, not even in my own head. Part of me, and I hate this part, I do, But I won't pretend it isn't there part of me hears. I've just been thinking about you a lot lately, and want so badly for it to be true on its own terms, unconnected to any assessed value on any parcel of land, that I nearly called him back twice just to test whether wanting something enough can make it clean. But I keep landing on the same place. He set the terms once a month, and only if I asked, and I could ask exactly once. He decided what Tyler would be told and when. He did all that with a calm voice at my own kitchen table, and I said okay, God help me, because I loved him more than I loved my own dignity. And now, the rules he wrote are apparently retractable the moment there's a number attached to me worth returning for. Tyler still calls, though. That part I haven't found it in me to shut off, and maybe that's its own kind of foolishness, keeping one door cracked while I bolt the other. But I can't make myself treat a 17-year-old boy as guilty of his father's arithmetic. He asks about Junie, his aunt, technically 3 years younger than him, which he thinks is funny in a good way. He asked if he could come down to Ashby sometime, meet Loretta, meet his sister. I told him yes. I haven't told him yet what to do about his own father calling me, because I don't think that's a decision that's mine to hand him. I wrote Curtis a letter about 2 months ago. Loretta doesn't know I still have it. I sat at the kitchen table one night after everybody was asleep, and I wrote 4 pages by hand, the way I used to do the ledgers at the feed store, because typing it felt too easy to delete, and I didn't trust myself not to delete it. I told him about Earl, about the 40 acres and why I never said a word about it for 30 years, about watching what his family did to a dying man, and deciding I would rather be thought poor than be circled the way Earl was circled. I told him about Junie, about the floor of her bedroom, about all the things I know now that I didn't know when he was small, and how sorry I am that he got the early version of me and not this one. I told him $300 in a mailbox is a number I have never once stopped being able to see. Exact. The way you see a bruise days after the thing that made it. And then I told him this was the last page, that I loved him the whole time, every single year of the silence, and that loving him and trusting him again were, I had come to understand, 2 entirely separate accounts, and I did not currently have the second one open. I almost didn't write the next part, and I've gone back and forth on whether I should have. I told him I wasn't angry about the land staying mine. I was angry, I wrote, that he never gave me the chance to be angry about it, that he decided 6 years ago I was worth $300 and a set of rules, and I never once got to argue the number, never got to say that's not enough, not for a whole life, not for the man who taught you to read a scale and balance a ledger and love a boy the only way he knew how at the time. I told him that a father finding out his son thinks he's disposable is its own kind of surgery, one nobody offers you a deposit plan for. I told him I was glad Tyler called. I meant that without any qualification at all, the one clean thing in the whole letter. I folded it into thirds. I addressed the envelope in my own handwriting, Curtis Combs, the Charlotte address Tyler had given me without my even asking for it. I put a stamp on it. It's sitting on the kitchen table right now, under the salt shaker so it doesn't blow off when Loretta opens the window over the sink in the mornings. I look at it most days. Junie asked me last week what it was, and I told her it was a letter to somebody I used to know real well, which is true in a way I didn't fully mean for it to be true when I said it. I haven't mailed it. I don't know yet if I'm going to.